Hello, everyone. Welcome back to StatTech Researchers Seminar Series on Measuring Progress and Well-Being. I'm Kelsey O'Connor, one of our organizers. Today, we have a special seminar with members of the EU Horizon Project, WISER, who will discuss the first draft of their well-being policy guide. Before we get started, a brief update on our third annual Measuring Progress workshop, which is taking place this June here in Luxembourg. So registration is now open. And for the speakers, be mindful that the deadline is this Sunday, the 19th of April. In general, we're very much looking forward to the event. As some of you heard earlier, we've added a half a day to due to the large number of excellent abstracts. And back to today, for those who do not know the WISER project well, it was funded under the European Union's Horizon Europe program to explore and promote well-being within a sustainable economic framework. The framework in turn allows for the identification of win-win-win-win development strategies pertaining to well-being, productivity, sustainability, and inclusiveness. And it aims to guide the design and implementation of policies towards the procurement of a sustainable and inclusive high well-being economy. Led by Martijn Berger, the project brings together numerous researchers, many of them here as part of StatTech research, and also more still through the International Society for Quality of Life Studies. The project, launched nearly 3 years ago, is now entering its dissemination phase and seeks feedback to further refine its proposals. Martijn Berger will speak first for approximately 20 minutes, followed by Francesco Sarracino, Javier Martinez, Stefano Bartolini, and Simone de Alessandro. Then we have the discussants, Lars Mortensen and Frank van Oort. Throughout the event, I encourage you to write questions in the chat. Otherwise, please keep your microphones muted during the presentations. Following the discussants and any responses, we will address questions from the chat and open the floor for additional Q&A. As a last reminder, we are recording the event. You'll be able to find this and past recordings on our website and YouTube channel. Martijn, you can bring up your slides. And without further ado, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you, Kelsey, for this kind introduction. Thank you all for being here today, where we discuss a guide for well-being policy. So based on WISER's Green Book, Well-being in a Sustainable Economy Revisited, Kelsey gave a very elaborate and nice introduction. It's part of the European Union's Horizon program, and we are currently in the stage of finishing the project and translating our scientific findings to policy advice. What I will do today in the first 15 to 20 minutes is give a brief introduction on the project and zooming particularly in on the relationships between economic growth, social capital, and well-being. And in the second part, Simone, Stefano, Francesco will talk about like policies, proposals, based on these findings. So the starting point of the project is like to think about a very simple question, which probably like has a more complicated answer, or maybe a very simple answer. Like, what do most people want? Do most people want a healthy life, or do they want to become rich? Do they want to have good social relationships? And from there on, find out like what is important to reach this like state. And I think that we kind of agree that people would like, especially a very long and a happy life. They would like to live long and happily ever after. And then the question is on how can we reach this long and happy life? What is necessary for it? Maybe the government can't make us happy, but at least country governments can shape conditions under which people could flourish. And the mainstream narrative in economics has been the idea that economic growth would lead to longer and happier lives. And predominantly, through consumption. So the idea is that if there is economic growth and if there is a lot of economic growth, this increases the consumption possibilities. And the idea is that people can make very good decisions themselves of what would make them then happier, and that would eventually result in a higher quality of life. And like there's some evidence about on this, or at least some support. So on average, you see that richer people are happier and healthier. They live longer, have also better access to goods and services. But at the same time, you should realize that if you look at societal level, economic growth is merely a condition for a good life, but not necessarily an outcome of a good life. And if you would also then look at the empirical evidence that is out there, of which most of you are very familiar with, then you see that there is something like the Easterlin paradox in health economics. There's something like the Preston curve. So there is only a limited relationship between economic growth and life expectancy, especially for a relationship that holds for the poorer countries. And when we look at the Easterlin paradox, yeah, we can observe that there has been a tremendous economic growth over the past decades. But this tremendous economic growth has not always materialized in higher levels of subjective well-being. In one of the most recent work on the topic by Eastlin and by Kelsey, they found that if a country's GDP were increased by 1 percentage point, it would take more than 500 years to raise happiness by 1 point. And especially like in Western countries, you see a very limited relationship between the country's GDP per capita growth and increases in well-being. And there have been several explanations out there in the literature to explain why there is such a limited relationship. I think the early literature on the Easterlin paradox predominantly pointed at like behavioral explanations. So as social beings, we socially compare. So it's not only about absolute income, it's about relative income. It doesn't only matter how much money you have as a person, but also how much you earn compared to your colleagues or neighbors. And then there's something like adaptation, an hedonic treadmill. In the beginning, when we are young and we earn only a little bit of money, then we're very happy with a small car. But also, like when we get richer, we also desire more. We adapt to our current new circumstances, and then we also strive for more and more. So we adapt to improve circumstances and socially compare too much, and that would result in the fact that our well-being doesn't increase that much over time. But at the same time, there's also a difference perhaps in what we think is important and what is actually important for a good life. Some things, as shown in research by Aker already like 20 years ago, matters less than you think. So things like money or beauty. Other things like volunteering or free time or social skills, perhaps also social relationships, matter more than you think. So we might also overly focus on money and don't think about other as things that are good for a good life. And also when you look at values in most recent research by Delhay and colleagues, then there are also different types of lives that might result in a kind of a happy life. It's not only the prosperous life that might, and achieving that might result in a happy life, but also, for example, more focusing on emotional comfort or having nice experiences, which maybe requires some money, but that's more than just about money. At the same time, the relationship between economic growth and well-being is also very heterogeneous. Um, so we see in some countries that economic growth and life evaluation go hand in hand, as shown in the latest research. There's also part of the WISER project by Francesco and the static team. So you see, like in many countries, that the relationship between average yearly GDP per capita growth and changes in life evaluation is limited, or even that there is no relationship at all. In some other countries, the two go hand in hand, and that begs also the question: is it not only about the quantity of growth, but is it also about the quality of growth? Like, not every growth is necessarily equal. And economic growth can lead to isolation or stress or inequality or environmental degradation, and then growth is bad, and then well-being may decline. But if economic growth can promote social relationships and it's not necessarily bad for the environment, and if economic growth is more equally divided, then that might contribute to longer and happier lives. And that is also like where what we do in the WISER project. We say that economic growth is not necessarily good or bad, and economic growth is to some extent can be also important for subjective well-being, but particular forms of economic growth, they might like do more harm to well-being than good. So economic growth can be jobless, for example, when economic growth does not create like work. Economic growth can go also at the expense of democracy and voice. And then voiceless economic growth might also reduce subjective well-being. Economic growth might also be very unequally divided and maybe ruthless. And if it's unequally divided, then people, might hear about that the economy is growing, but if they are not experiencing it, then it also does not translate in higher average subjective well-being. Economic growth might also be futureless in the sense that it harms the environment. And in that sense, we might not only care about the well-being of current generations, but we might also care about the well-being of future generations, apart from the fact that environmental degradation might have a direct impact on subjective well-being. And the type of bad growth that we will focus on today, ruthless economic growth. So economic growth might come at the expense of social capital. So it is possible in that regard that economic growth undermines social capital, because how economic growth happened over the past decades has changed also how societies are organized. So economic growth over the past decades went hand in hand with increased mobility, more marketization, more individualization. And if growth in the end also undermines social relationships that can make life meaningful and contribute to longer and happier life, economic growth might become counterproductive to longer and happier lives. And there is some evidence around of this declining social capital. Also, like in the paper by the work by Sarracino and colleagues, that they report the erosion of social networks, trust in community. This has already been around since also the work of Robert Putnam, this work on bowling alone, which already appeared in the 1990s, and which he warned for the decline in social capital in Western societies, although he was predominantly focusing on the United States. He, in the beginning, focused particularly on the community and the decline of communities, particularly through participation in groups and associations, which you also see in the graph on the right, has declined over the past decades. But you also see that other aspects of social capital have notoriously declined. So there is less confidence in national institutions nowadays than there was in the 80s. There's also a decline in the trust in others. not in this graph, but if we look at statistics, about loneliness, it is increasingly recognized as a large problem in society that also affects our physical and mental health. And in that regard, economic growth might have become rootless. There is also, like, in that sense, this relationship between economic growth and trust, and especially on how we produced economic growth has reduced trust. So in the work by Sarracino and Slater, they show that there's a negative causal relationship between also economic growth and trust. And over 10 years, 1% annual economic growth rate has decreased trust by nearly 2%. And it's also particularly in how growth was produced. Because how does economic growth decline social capital? And there are very different mechanisms out there that need also further examination. What Francesco and Julia do is particularly focus on inequality as mechanism, or they show that inequality is probably a mechanism through which economic growth has reduced trust over the past decades. So growth, it has disproportionately benefited the high income groups in Western societies. And this rising income and wealth gap has created a kind of social distance, resulting also in reduced interaction between groups, perhaps less empathy, and that went hand in hand with increasing perceptions of unfairness and declining the generalized trust in society. But there are more ways in which economic growth might have resulted in a decline of social capital. Time pressure is another aspect. So growth of income can also go through increasing work intensity, especially in more competitive economies. And that longer hours, and what we also see in the increase in dual earner households, has led to maybe less time together and weaker levels of social capital. There's also been like status competition. So market competition can also crowd out cooperation within society. So growth also raises aspirations, and herewith can intensify competition. And what has resulted in that is that this relative income has become also more salient, and others' income is increasingly perceived as one's own loss. And then there is the thing of labor mobility. Resulting in weaker social ties. People move more frequently for jobs in some economies more than in other economies. But people become less and less attached to their local social context, meet each other also less. That's also in part of technological change. But in the end, we see what is going on. Economic growth has resulted also in part in inequality, marketization, time pressure, mobility, competition, and that resulted in an erosion of trust, reciprocity, and perhaps also shared identity, resulting in a weaker social fabric and a decoupling what we see from growth from subjective well-being. And this is in part paradoxical, because trust is essentially good for growth, we know in economics, but it also undermines trust. So as we also know from the economics literature, that trust reduces transaction costs. Trust also facilitates working relationships. If you trust people, there's no need to make very extensive contracts. It also reduces, in that sense, incentives for free riding and moral hazard. We also know from trust that it mitigates, in that regard, principal agent problems. And at the same time, we have seen that the way we produce economic growth undermines this trust and social capital more broadly. But this also means that if we would invest again in our social capital, that would generate like a win-win, and hopefully eventually a win-win-win-win situation. So, like, we need to restore the social fabric, and not only because it has had negative consequences for subjective well-being, but also because restoring the social fabric is in the longer run again good for economic growth. Although I have to say it requires an investment. And so it would make, in the end, addressing also collective issues that we are facing as a society easier. It could also decrease some conspicuous consumption because, if we compare socially less, we are, and we through having richer social lives, that might also reduce some types of consumption patterns. And what we also know from the research, also conducted within the context of the WISER project, that happier people are more productive. Well, what do we need for this? And that is also when we come to the policy proposals, and I'm going to hand over there to Francesco. If we go back to the work of Robert Putnam, and then he wrote his first book in the 90s, The Upswing is a more recent work of him. Putnam argues that restoring the social fabric requires a more coordinated shift. You don't need only economic change, but you also need institutional and cultural change. And we need to move, Putnam says, from more individual success to kind of shared flourishing, which basically comes down to go from an I culture to a we culture. But you understand that such a transition is not always easy to make, since it involves cultural change and it involves a behavioral change. But at the same time, policies may help to set a shift in motion. And then the question is, what could we do to restore the social fabric? So based on the WISER research, we came up with some policy proposals that we would like to discuss with you. And herewith, I also give the floor to Francesco.
Thank you very much, Martijn. So now we enter more into the part of the proposals for policies for well-being, as Martijn has illustrated so far. And I will kick off with some policies for social capital. Next slide, please. So by social capital, we mean basically trust, networks of social relations and shared values that allow a society to cooperate and achieve common goals. And differently from what we initially believed, there is evidence that has accumulated over time showing that social capital is not fixed in time. It actually changes, at least some of its components, in particular trust, volunteering, helping others. Martijn has already introduced the chart that you see on this slide that basically documents that on average, both in a set of developed and developing countries, some measures of social capital like trust in others, confidence in national institutions, participation in groups and association is declining. And this is a problem. It is a problem because these measures are some of the stronger predictors of subjective well-being. So the fact that people share less social relations, that trust others less, that volunteer less, hampers their well-being and their health. But we also there is also more to it. We know, for instance, that social capital is substitute for social comparisons for people's well-being. This means that the decline in social capital pushes people to consume in order to compensate for poor social relations. Also, the lack of social capital hampers the efficacy of public policies, as countries that enjoy richer social networks are those where people comply more and better with public policies. We've seen this a lot during the pandemic. And we have evidence suggesting that economic activity is, at least in part, responsible for this decline. The good news is that there are policies that we can adopt to protect and eventually create the conditions to nourish social capital. Public investment, for instance, could be used to support the social infrastructure that enables repeated, meaningful interaction. I believe that Javier Martinez will probably dig further into this in a few minutes. But the creation of community centers, libraries, parks, playgrounds, sport and cultural facilities are all infrastructure that are preconditions for people to meet and create social relations. And we have a lot of examples, successful example of this implementation. Think, for instance, of the case of the Ciclovia in Bogota, the Medellin library parks, or even coming closer to us, the organization of the urban fabric in Barcelona. Other possible policies include providing stable funding to local associations, volunteering networks, cooperatives, and even neighborhood initiatives. This is one of the ways through which providing stable funding, we can have a long-lasting commitment to social organization. One possible example here is provided by the initiative of social prescribing. This is more institutionalized compared to what I'm suggesting here, but social prescribing in UK is part of the initiative of the NHS to address mental health problems. Other initiatives include promoting deliberative governance, such as participatory budgeting and citizen assemblies. These are instruments that can improve legitimacy, make policy more responsive to people's everyday experiences, even decrease the distance between constituents and their representatives, and in general favors the participation of the individuals to a community and stimulates the sense of belonging to a community. The last idea for policies that we push forward is that governments could support social enterprises through public procurement rules. Here the idea is that social enterprises create value, social and environmental value, they prioritize social and environmental value over profit maximization. They prioritize local employment and stimulate local economic activities. These are all public goods that standard procurement rules tend to overlook, but that could be prioritized exactly because they can constitute an infrastructure for social capital. Concluding, the next slide, please. Some considerations. These initiatives do not have to have large financial costs. For instance, we've seen experiments in Northern America, in Pennsylvania, showing that rehabilitating natural parks does not have to be expensive. But the success of this kind of initiatives depends a lot on, requires continuity of investments, coordination across policy areas, and sustained political commitment. So it's important to give to these initiatives some continuity. Also, a big challenge, especially in a world that is of politics that is fast-paced, is that the benefits of this kind of investment are visible only over time. So we should accompany this with a reform of politics as short-termist and moving more towards long-term results, which can also be done thanks to the adoption of a unified framework of policies for well-being, such as the one that Martijn has presented at the beginning. What we can expect by prioritizing social capital in our policy is to improve subjective well-being, with consequent benefit for health, but also for the economy. Enhanced cooperation, which will benefit the ability to address collective problems and reduce the conspicuous consumption. And in general, an improvement of people's experience with their life in more socially sustainable economies. And with this, I leave the floor to, I guess, Javier.
Thanks, Francesco. I'm going to concentrate on the role of cities and the role of planning. Let me start by saying that we have to redesign cities for well-being. In WISER, we observe that planning and design can shape daily life. Participants in our research clearly were able to indicate areas they prefer to go because they can walk, they can socialize, especially some green areas. They say it's great for work and to socialize, to go with my children, with my grandchildren. So urban planning and design can shape the way we can interact with others. So it offers us spaces to enjoy environmental benefits. And of course, well-being is strongly shaped then by neighborhood conditions, how safe they are, how accessible they are, how they allow these type of interactions, and we found in particular important how they promote the access to everyday blue and green spaces. So if we design cities for well-being, we can support stronger social relations and reduce also loneliness. We can create spaces where people can encounter, and the type of cities that allow us to do that are preferably compact cities. So cities that are proximity-based, they're well-connected, they prioritized inclusive public spaces over gated and segregated urban forms or gated communities. Because of that, they promote non-motorized forms of transport. They can reduce car dependency, more physical activity, a reduction of emissions, less land consumption, and of course, defensive forms of private consumption. So cities can support social cohesion at the same time that they can support environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. And in WISER, we also found important the role of the neighborhood scale. And that's the place where we can see the effect and where we can take action together with residents. And usually these are neighborhoods are mixed use. These are proximity neighborhoods where people can encounter others while they do shopping, while they access health infrastructure in the neighborhoods, where they can share the library spaces with others. And these are also neighborhoods that are safe and accessible for all. So also those that have reduced mobilities. That of course encourages more street life, also more intergenerational presence where the elderly can walk out safely, children can also play outside safely. So these are inclusive public spaces where also again the local blue and green infrastructure are very important. And this is also what we found in our research in WISER, that people appreciate spaces where they can relax, where they can have physical activity. This enhances, of course, not only their mental well-being, but also the physical and the social well-being. Usually these are spaces that are multisensory, they are beautiful, they have colors, they have symbolic experience that people can attach to what they, with the places they grew up there. So we found also important that these spaces should be designed in a participatory manner. So they are co-designed with residents. That builds trust, of course, brings in ownership, legitimacy, also allow us to identify barriers that block participation of certain groups, access, allow us to identify who is benefiting from these spaces and who is affected, what matters and where interventions may be needed to reduce, for example, inequalities in access to those areas. Next slide, please. And finally, I would like to conclude with the importance of embedding impact. And that's something that, if you're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, the target 11.7 talks about providing access to safe and inclusive green and public spaces. And I think that for that, we need to prioritize disadvantaged groups, in particular, those that live in more deprived areas, those with fewer resources, those with limited mobility, the elderly, women, children, and also those with a migration background. So this is important to bring all these gains of social capital in an equitable manner. What we also found is very important for those residents, that they see that not only the infrastructure is provided, but there is maintenance, there is care, that the government takes care of the long-term maintenance of those spaces, that the spaces do not become no-go areas, that they are taken care of. And what we can expect in the long run, and that has to do with stronger social relations, people where you can encounter others, where they will feel less lonely, people will perceive more safety and accessibility of the area, and more important, that they will the outcome will be more equitable neighborhoods in terms of quality of life and well-being. So this is the role of planning and urban design on well-being from our side in WISER. Thank you. And I think now is the role of Stefano, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
Just as a reminder, please put questions in the chat if you have them. I don't want you to forget any questions that you may have.
Yes, thank you. I'll speak about schooling, a mess. Can you hear me, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, mass public schooling was introduced in Europe in the late 19th century. The model of vertical teaching, which continues to be the prevailing teaching method. Slide, please, Martijn. What is vertical teaching? With vertical teaching methods, teachers lecture and ask students questions, students take notes and read textbooks, and the central relationship in the classroom is between teacher and students. But since the beginning of the 20th century, an alternative to vertical teaching was implemented by Maria Montessori. Montessori schools continue to thrive and develop, and after 1 century, now there are more than 60,000 Montessori schools across the world. The features of Montessori schooling are multi-age classrooms, no grades or tests, individual or small group learning of cognitive and also social skills, and great participation of students to the choice of work. And slide, please. When vertical and Montessori schooling are compared, what is found is that Montessori children perform better on standardized reading and math tests, although tests that they do in their life, because they don't have tests during their schooling career. They interact more positively in the playground. They're less conflictual, less aggressive. They show higher social cognition and control, and greater concern for fairness and justice. They write more creatively and use more complex sentence structures, and they feel more connected with their community at school. So there is no cost in terms of academic achievements, and many other costs, many advantages in terms of well-being and social capital. The features of many of the principles of Montessori schools are the basis of participatory teaching, which has been widely adopted in Northern European countries. Participatory teaching is based on group work, projects, on students who ask teachers questions instead of being teachers asking questions to students. And the central relationship in the classroom is between students. Slide, please. When the participatory methods are assessed, as Algan and co-authors did in a very influential paper, they find that participatory practices promotes many dimensions of social capital, as cooperative capacities with other students and teachers, membership in association, trust in institutions, participation in civil society, and also self-esteem. As for the impact on subjective well-being, group work, a central feature of participatory teaching, has been shown to increase students' life satisfaction, and it comes at no cost in terms of academic achievements. So I come to my conclusion. We are facing a mounting crisis of well-being and mental health among children and adolescents. It's really alarming. A switch to participatory schooling is one of the methods, one of the tools which are available to contrast this crisis. It is a low-cost change. Again, I insist, as others did before me, on the low cost of the kind of intervention we are proposing, because switching to participatory teaching just entails different training of teachers. And it is beneficial or costless, depending on the study, in terms of academic achievements. Last, the link with sustainability. Traditional vertical teaching methods are based on the stimulation of competition and possession. Competition is encouraged, and the reward for the competitive efforts of students is the possession of an individual grade. This teaching is oriented towards economic growth and tends to produce anxious and competitive individuals whose fear of being inadequate can only be alleviated through continuous economic advancement. By promoting social capital and well-being, participatory schooling can play a fundamental role in shaping individuals who do not seek reassurance in consumption and income, but are instead able to enjoy life, be satisfied with what they have, and organize a satisfactory life with their means, with what they have. So, training individuals whose lives are less centered on consumption and money is an essential component of long-term sustainability. When we think of the ecological transition, we are mainly focusing on what type of technologies can enhance are an important component of the answer. Thank you, I finished.
Stefano, sorry, the last two sentences you broke up. Maybe you can repeat them? Just the last two sentences.
So my conclusion is that training individuals whose lives are less centered on consumption and money is an essential component of long-term sustainability. When we think of the ecological transition, we focus on what kind of technologies we need to be sustainable, but we should also focus on what type of individuals can enhance the ecological transition, and a change in schooling is an important part of the answer.
Thank you. Good, Simone?
Okay, so I mean, my role here was to make a reflection about which are the macroeconomic effect of decision of prioritizing well-being. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And usually, I mean, we saw this kind of impact on well-being as a sort of final step of any model or scenario analysis. So what we are trying to do in the project is to try to endogenize it. What does it mean? To understand that if policies that aim to increase some particular, driver of well-being, like, for instance, social capital or perceived inequality or other drivers that affect well-being, can change somehow the economy. But at the same time, we try to characterize the endogenous relationship that goes from the macro outcome to the well-being drivers. This was a bit the main ideas that are the basis of the work that we try to do. So there is, of course, no point to discuss the methods here, but just to clarify something important is that we took some data set where we found the relationship between the well-being drivers and the final consumption of households. And so we can look at the change in the composition of consumption when change in the economic, in these well-being drivers are implemented into the model. And this change in consumption would affect this kind of aggregate demand, and at the same time, so many other macro outcomes that come back as a feedback to the well-being drivers and so to the well-being. So this is possible. We made this approach using this version of the Eurogreen model that we developed in the last years, that now is becoming a bit more wiser because my Wi-Fi, so now my network at university was buzzed down, and so I will move fast. Sorry, really sorry for that. So if you can go to the next slide. So the issue was to try to characterize the scenario according to the policy of the Green Book. So in particular today, I would like to show some preliminary results about how strengthened social capital can make an impact on the, macroeconomic index and variables that we usually look at. And so there are a few research questions that connected the policy and social capital to well-being drivers, so how they are affected from these changes, and in particularly how they influence the consumption patterns of households at the same time, which are the macroeconomic implications. So we keep this work for all the policies suggested in the Green Book, and we aggregate them on a few objectives. And if you see, when we speak about strengthening social capital, what we try to do is to see what happens when we make some investment for increased neighbor quality of the cities. For instance, what happens if we promote policies to relationship and trust, and also something that has a quite higher macroeconomic effect is about what happens implement policy of working time reduction that can free the time, inside the households and to redistribute the work as well. So we couple all these policies in one single policy package, and we see which are, let's say, the consequence. Just something that is important to mention about the drivers of well-being that I was presenting before is that some of these drivers are fully endogenized in the model, especially the ones that are related to inequality and the ones that, for instance, are related to social relationship. This means that the model can provide, a feedback loop to understand what's going on in terms of life satisfaction and macroeconomic variable. So please, the next slide. Okay, so these are the preliminary results when introduce these scenarios. And here, if you see, we also had, lastly, a policy to increase the access to public services that are considered in education, health, but also public administration. Then we'll see that all these policies by alone can increase slightly the life satisfaction. And according to the data set that we are using. But what is a bit more important is that, in particular, working time reduction is not providing a direct impact on life satisfaction by itself, but through this channel considered inside the social relationship, let's say. So this means that if you sum up all these policies and we consider also the investment and the cost that the government has to make to realize this investment, we have that life satisfaction can increase comparing to the baseline by a certain degree, in this case a bit more than 4%. Then of course this is really depending on the amount of investment that we implement in the model. So the next slide. So the green scenario is the scenario where we activate all these policies together and we create this policy package that has the objective to improve social capital by itself. So this is probably one of the most important results from the model. That means that this change in social capital would affect how household would change the distribution of the distribution of consumption according to different goods, right? So if you see, just to make an example, if there is an increase in social capital that is driven by these policies, then we expect a reduction on food consumption, maybe some more transport because people would move a bit more, and other change. That what is interesting here is to understand how this change driven by the effect on social capital would matter for the macroeconomic in itself. And at the same time, of course, the last feedback would be to follow what's going on from the macroeconomic system to the well-being indicator. So maybe if we go on and then So if you see, these are a bit the result at the macro level. Just to clarify that while we try to make these policies quite similar in terms of the impact of different drivers on life satisfaction, the macroeconomic results are really impact mainly from the working time reduction. That of course make a quite broad effect in terms of the macroeconomic model, much more than the other policies connected to investment in social capital a bit more directly through increasing trust, increasing social, environmental, so in quality of the network and so on. So you see that the main result is that that policies mainly induce a reduction in the Gini coefficient. That means a reduction in the inequality among the households that we can represent through this macroeconomic model, a strong decline in unemployment rate. That means that, of course, the working time reduction policies is working and is working with unequal pay. And the fact that there is this increase in the, in the labor share, if you want, so an increase in the wage, would make a bit of growth, right? That is the main cause of emission. What is interesting here is that the other policies that we introduce of social capital are making a sort of decoupling the emission from GDP, because this change in consumption that we follow can reduce slightly the emission at the total level if we are not considering the increase in GDP. So what we learned until now, even though I told you that these results are still preliminary, is that there are trade-offs that are making in terms of fully decoupling well-being from, let's say, the production scale of the economy. So, but of course, the direct impact on, in terms of life satisfaction is really strong. So they can really matter a lot. The question now is how to make some policies that could make a sort of sufficiency policies. That means to maintain this increase in well-being, reducing the increase of emission that you see here, that is mainly due again to the increase in GDP. Remember, at this moment, we are not introducing any other energy policy, for instance, that we can do. So it's just the result, the pure result of a specific investment on social capital. And again, the main result here at the macro level is due to the fact that working time reduction would affect the economy in a broad effect. I think I will stop here. And maybe the only remark that I want to say is that there are the fact of working and to prioritizing these well-being policies, or the policies that, for instance, are increasing or strengthening the social capital, can be really something that open the kind of policies for the transition itself. So if the final objective is how to prioritizing well-being, but also to make the people resilient to changing the economic system that you have to do for reducing emission, it seems that this kind of policy can really enlarge, let's say, the option that we have in order to make the transition feasible without compromising the well-being of people, especially of the poor. Okay, sorry for being really brief and disconnected for a while. But...
Thank you very much, Simone. So I think we're now to our first discussant, Lars, if you would. And it seems like we can turn our videos back on for those who want to. Feel free.
Thanks very much, Kelsey, and thanks everybody for inviting me. Let me just introduce myself first. My name is Lars Mortensen. I work at the European Environment Agency as an expert on circular economy and the well-being economy. I've been at the European Environment Agency for over 20 years now. The role of the European Environment Agency is an EU institution. So we monitor environment and climate in Europe, but we are not a policy-making institution. I want to make that clear. Before that, I was at the OECD and at the UN. So being a discussant here, I appreciate a lot the 5 really interesting presentations. I think this piece of research is tremendously important, both in the short term, but also in the longer term as we move our societies in a certain direction. I've agreed with Francesco a few points for me to comment on, and I'll do that as an employee of the European Environment Agency, but also I'm a member of Club of Rome, so much of my knowledge I have is also from that. Let me start with a first question, basically, which is, to which extent are the politicians open to discuss alternative paradigms beyond growth? From the EU institutions side, I would say at the moment, not too much. These priorities are very clear. It's about competitiveness, it's about security and resilience. But I would say that the extent to which policymakers are open to discuss this depends on to which extent people with knowledge are able to frame it within these priorities. So I think politicians are happy to discuss these things if they can see it within competitiveness, resilience, or security. The issue is that basically competitiveness is by far the highest priority, or is the top priority together with security, but there's no agreed definition of competitiveness. So that also opens up for a lot of discussion. What is competitiveness? Is it only about growth, or is it more also, can it be seen more in the sustainability paradigm as well? So there's a lot of discussions to be had there. In terms of the Green Book, I read it with interest. The 1-pager, the 2-pager, the 3-pager, and also the more pages. And just a few comments on those, because I've agreed to comment on those. Basically, in terms of the first proposal is to make well-being the primary policy objective. I would say in the EU right now, that seems difficult. The current Commission has made its priorities very, very clear. Well-being, I think, can be integrated into that, but cannot replace those. The question is, of course, what about the next Commission? Can well-being be a high priority there? There is an issue with well-being that many people don't consider, is the translation of it. You know, one thing is what it means in English. It means something very different when you translate it into German, and it means something perhaps different when you translate it into French and Danish. So there's a translation issue is there. So making the well-being a policy objective within the current policies right now, but I think with a few years' time, perhaps yes, depends everything on the new Parliament and the new Commission. So moving on to reduce the policy proposal 2 is about reducing income equality. I would say there, I think there's quite some options. A lot of that happens in national policy, I would say. We've just had elections, as you know, in Hungary the other day. The Danish elections happened a few weeks ago. Governments are being formed, and there I see actually a lot of potential. So a lot of that happens at the national level, and there are potentials to a varying degree, I would say. Moving on to policy proposal 3, invest in social capital. I would see that as very much happening already, especially in cities. In the city I live, in Copenhagen, there's been a lot of investments on that over the years. You see a lot of cities thriving because a lot of people move to the cities. There's a lot of taxes. There's a lot of income. There's a lot of potential to invest in the social capital. I see this happening, you know, with bicycling and all kind of other things. So I see this happening, and that goes along with your policy proposal 5, which is about redesigning the cities for well-being. Is there potential to do so in the short term? I think yes, because cities have a lot of money. They are changing. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of issues with over-tourism and stuff, but also a lot of potentials. So I see policy proposals 3 and 5 could actually be, a lot of things could happen in the short term. In terms of policy proposal 4, reorganizing working time and work environments. Perhaps I find this more difficult. This is a really difficult discussion in the current political climate, I would say, with competitiveness. And on the last policy proposal, this is about the schooling for well-being. I think this is hard, but a lot of discussions are happening in countries now. And I know, for example, in Italy, with the former minister Lorenzo Friamonti, a lot of things were tried there. And I think it's just up to the countries to keep moving on that. And that leads me to just a few other questions before I finish from my side. Basically, what do you think policymaker needs from scientists to make better policy on beyond GDP? I think right now what policymakers need from scientists is to understand how this science can be related to current policy priorities. if there's a better understanding of how the well-being debate relates to competitiveness, security, and resilience, I think there'll be a lot of help. So in the next few years, I think that could be really helpful. Also, we discussed with a question about how can different policy levels, the national, regional, and cities, work together to support well-being oriented policies. I think at the time being a lot, because I see these levels not talking too much to each other at the moment. I, as somebody working at the EU level, I talk very little to people working in the cities. I see a lot of things happening in the cities, but I see a lot of potential for us learning from each other. And with the current priorities being very clear at the EU level, direction, sometimes in the cities going in sometimes in different directions, and national priorities also changing with elections. I think this is crucial to make improvement, basically. And then I was asked if I had any other points to make, and I just wanted to make my last point. And I think my last point is twofold. First of all, I think that times where a lot of things are happening right now with the geopolitical uncertainty is where things can change and will change. And it's really important to be open for changes in such times. That's my first point, because, we all know that the situation we're in today could look very differently tomorrow or the day after, with everything happening, including from the US side. Another thing is that we are now, almost 2 years after the last election of the EU Parliament. In 3 years, we're going to have elections again. So I see a really huge potential to already now work towards bringing all these insights into well-being and be ready for discussion for also the next Commission and the next Parliament in the EU, and when elections happen in the national countries. So that was it from my side. I hope it was of some use, and I look forward to discuss further also with the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Sorry, excuse me, Lars. Frank, you're up next.
Yeah, I'm Frank van Oort, Erasmus University Rotterdam, and I'm a professor in urban and regional economics and well-being. So quite interesting topics to hear today also from you. A lot of appreciation for all the work. And I've also been reading the Green Book. So not maybe too surprisingly, but many of my things are overlapping with what Lars was saying. So what I think is important is to see that there are a lot of dilemmas in what we are looking at the moment. So it's already the big dilemma, competitiveness versus other issues, and competitiveness is much higher on the agenda. But I think part and parcel of competitiveness is well-being, because it is part of your competitiveness. So that is a very important thing. Where do policymakers focus on nowadays? They focus on affordability, competitiveness, welfare, but those are also very important ingredients for well-being. And we saw that in the presentation of Martijn and the others. Higher economic growth and productivity might lead to more financing of well-being issues in case of redistributive governments. Well-being might in the end be more productive, because Martijn clearly said happy workers are more productive workers. And then there's the whole thing about spillovers and externalities, and it might be positive and negative. And I think policymakers and politicians want to know those dilemmas and those trade-offs. What does it cost? How much more environmental quality would be offset by more inclusion and those kind of things? Those are difficult. We are good in measuring things, we are good in relating, we are good in correlation, but we're not that good in causality and other issues. So showing the trade-offs, I think that's something we as scientists have to do. We don't make the decisions for policymakers, but we can show them, if you choose certain pathways, then there might be certain consequences. Another dilemma is the huge heterogeneity of the people involved where policymakers are dealing with. So Do we talk about people with high income, low income, fixed jobs, flexible jobs? I think these have all very different relations to well-being. And if you are in certain weaker groups, of course, there are a lot of bottlenecks, and they are not called bottlenecks for nothing. So they have to be solved first. And that's always the short-term span of control where policymakers look at. And they should actually look also on the longer term. They should have missions. They should have courage to also have a larger view. But I work a lot with policymakers, and I see they have a reflex to look at the short-term bottlenecks all the time, because that's where they are elected for, that's where they have to solve things for. So this heterogeneity is an issue, and it's also something we should show policymakers. I heard a few times that we should have less consumption. Well, as I'm partly micro, partly macro economist, less consumption means that we would save more, and then maybe other people would spend the money, or we spend it later, or so less consumption in itself is not always good for well-being and for structural change, and that's something we have to look for. And I don't think we can very easily say, oh, we should just have less consumption and then problems get smaller. Yes, maybe on the short term, but on the long term, probably we need also consumption and GDP for the financial structure and the financial system we have. Another problem policymakers face is that they are very fragmented themselves. We are fragmented in our universities. I have here many departments and many faculties, and I try to talk to them, and sometimes I talk back, and sometimes not. They have the same within ministries, in governments, and they are extremely fragmented, and they feel responsible for a certain part of the policy issue. And there is a lot to do in how to organize this much better. I heard a lot of people talking about policymakers and policy, but as Lars also said, yeah, they are on different levels. So it's the EU, it's national, it's cities, it's even neighborhoods within cities. And the smaller the scale, the more they know about local circumstances, and the more they know what might be the bottlenecks and what might be the issues to look at. So I think it's very important to have some kind of multi-level interface, because without it, it will remain quite abstract, and it will not land in the places where it really matters. So I think the presentation showed quite some issues where that could be done, and I think that's very good. And that's, I think, something to look for this multi-level governance issue. In the end, someone has to do it. And then I want to end in the same way as Lars said, like, is there something missing? I was missing the word structural change and trade-offs. Like, we are facing a lot of structural changes. More people working in services, less in manufacturing, transitions for energy, for circularity. It means that in the future, people need different skills for their jobs. They need different education. And that was also mentioned that if you have, that's an issue to look at. But if you have so much uncertainty on future skills, on future markets, on future influence of artificial intelligence and how it might impact jobs, how it might impact the functioning of society, it really impacts the resilience of people and the resilience of industries and the resilience of economies. So what Lars also mentioned was this whole idea about strategic autonomy. We should make things more ourselves, not dependent on crucial value chains, something that is on the EU level and national levels a lot. But if you translate that to all the other uncertainties we already have facing the future of economies, that might add a lot. It might not be additive, but actually be multiplicative in how that becomes issue. And it's a task of us researchers to show that complexity. One final thing Martijn mentioned, it's also about what happens later, what happens elsewhere, the definition of sustainability or well-being. Yeah, that's important. In the Netherlands, we have a huge discussion about the big steel factory that is polluting and it should move out. But if you make the same factory in another country, maybe a more developing country, it will be 20 times more polluting than if you do it here. So all those kind of trade-offs are usually missed a lot in the discussions with policymakers, because they focus on the steel factory that is locally a problem, a bottleneck, but there are much bigger interests involved about education, about people working there. Our 1,500 people working there. It's about their well-being. It's about sustainability. So things are much more complex, and we should show that. And I think that's important to look at. And I want to, as a final remark, the term rootless growth, I think it's very interesting. We need more roots, and we need more investments in social capital. They seem to be limited cost, large gains. So I think that is always a good cost benefit analysis to do these things. But don't forget the larger pictures, I think.
Thank you very much, Frank. So everyone, we are, as you can see, 15 minutes until the scheduled end of the seminar. But for those of you who are interested and willing, we will stay a bit longer. We have a survey that is important for the project to get some feedback on how to progress further. So I have just started a poll. I hope that you all can see this. I'll read the question, but then I expect you can all take a look and answer in your own time. And oh, let's see, open voting. There we go. In your view, how open are politicians to discussing alternatives to growth-based policy models? And we have a few options available here. I'll give you a moment to respond, and then we've got a couple more questions following this. And the participants here, from Martijn to Simone, maybe you can look at questions in the chat also and see if there's something that you would like to respond to directly on air. And we will also take as many questions as possible from people who have raised their hands. But we'll start with the survey. And it looks like we have a few votes now, so I'll move on to the next question. Question 2. What do you see as the main weaknesses or limitations of our proposals? There is an option at the bottom that says other, and unfortunately the tool does not allow us to do an open-ended answer there. However, at the end of the survey, you can type in your responses. Thank you, everyone, for participating. This can help the team move forward. They genuinely want your feedback. And I can see we have a variety of responses here, which is nice to see. All right, we'll wait one more moment and we'll go to the next question. All right.
Kelsey, is
Yep.
there time to answer on air to some of the questions that have been asked in the chat?
Yeah, we just need to be quick, and absolutely yes. You know, maybe each person can choose a question, and then we can go from there. Let's go. So the next question, do you see this? Yeah, here we are. So what would most improve these proposals? And you can select up to 2 answers. We'll wait one more moment. Get your votes in. Okay, next question. What do policymakers most need from scientists to better make policy on beyond GDP and well-being? And I'm going to keep your microphones muted for the moment, and then we can open up to the floor. We'll just wait another moment. All right. Next question. How should different policy levels work together to support well-being oriented policies? This is a great help, everyone. I'm looking forward to, although I'm not a project leader at all, I'm quite curious to see everybody's responses. It should be very interesting. And the next question is going to be open-ended, so everyone can write in whatever you would like, and we'll all be happy to read later. So is there anything else you would like to bring up? Please feel free to write it in. And I think at this point, I'll leave this open and we'll resume the Q&A. So I will, again, call in people in the audience, and we'll stay after, for those of you who can and are willing, to address Q&A. So if there was one of the speakers, Martijn, Stefano, Simone, Javier, Francesco, would like to respond to one of the questions in the chat, you can feel free. I think, Stefano, please go ahead.
Yeah, about competitiveness. What we are saying is very relevant to competitiveness because happier people are more productive, and there's a lot of evidence on this. Second, schooling is also important. The vertical schooling was projected in a context in which, 1 century ago, in which what was necessary was to train factory workers. And factory workers need discipline and need the capacity to get bored, which is one of the key skills that schooling teach. But now we live in an economy which is defined as an innovation economy, a knowledge economy, a post-industrial economy, and all these levels relate to the same thing. Innovation, creativity has become a key issue in the economic success of individuals, communities, and nations. And participatory teaching works much better for training creative people. So it's also a matter of competitiveness. And second, I would like to give an answer to some questions from Nuno. A couple of questions. Which political families can support this program and how to win elections? There's an enormous evidence. Let's take the example of the United States. The backbone of Trump's support is white people people, low education, low income, living in rural or deindustrialized areas. And there's a lot of research showing that these communities are no longer communities. They experience an enormous disgregation. Look that all the keywords of the far right, which is having so much success in recent times, are all collective. They speak about nation, they speak about roots, they speak about traditions, all beginning with capital letters. These are all collective keywords, which are an answer to a degradation of the collective quality of life, beginning with social capital. And J.D. Vance said, which is not true, that America first. He said family first, neighborhood second, third community, and fourth America. And these, again, are all collective keywords. So what is the answer of their opponents, let's say the center left, to this demand for a better collective quality of life? No answer. Basically, maybe just improving public services. So my point is that we need a progressive answer to the demand of people to live better collectively. And this answer, what we have been saying, is an answer. It is basically a progressive agenda for improving communities and collective quality of life. So the issue of the crisis of social capital is already on the stage, is already on the floor. And we need a different answer. Currently, the only answer we have is that the one which is coming from the far right, which is a regressive answer.
Thank you, Stefano. Francesco?
And just a small remark on the question by Wee Young Kim. I don't know if the pronunciation is right. What developing countries can do. Developing countries are taking the example of developed countries as the goal they want to reach. They have to be aware of the problems and the costs that we paid to reach development. And they have to be aware that protecting collective quality of life is key to a balanced development. Maybe those societies, those economies will grow slower, but better, in a more cohesive way, with less cleavages, less crisis of well-being, less tensions. Okay, I finished.
I will be very quick. First, I want to thank our two discussants and those who voted, because this has been very valuable. This is providing very valuable feedback, allows us to look at our work from different perspectives, and it's also a sort of test with reality. So a big thank you to all of you for this and for dedicating time to this work. Now, very quickly through some of the points that I've seen in the chat. You, Kelsey, have been raising a point about the optimal size of a community. I don't believe that the problem here is whether there is an optimal size. Naturally, things would work better when the community is smaller, because naturally it's easier to have good social relations there. However, this is not necessarily the case. Big cities can be organized in a way that they can nurture social relations. So Lars was giving the example of Copenhagen. Copenhagen in recent years has introduced a lot of projects of urban reorganization that are conducive to establishing social relations. So the point is not really a matter of size or optimal size of a community, but rather how we organize in this community and whether it is conducive to establishing social relations. Digital tools, I think this was Nuno. I think that digital tools can help as long as they do not replace face-to-face interactions, or they become rather an extensions that facilitate participation in social life. And we have some evidence in this regard also in the last World Happiness Report published in 2026. I think Lukas Spatz made 2 points. One was about democracy that requires participation, and what we can do as academics in this regard. And I believe that we as academics can provide evidence, summarizing evidence that more and more is coming from different fields even, supporting these tools. For instance, there is a lot of work done on participatory budgeting and its impacts on recreating social networks and providing well-being. This is a job for academics. The other point you made, as I'm speaking about Lucas, was about. I responded in the chat to that. Okay, so I will finish here. I'll try to be very fast, very short. But again, thank you so much, and I look forward to look at all these comments from a distance. Thank you.
If someone had another question live, we can still take a couple. It's just as long as people are willing to stay a little bit later. Martijn, Simone, Javier, also if you had a response to somebody in the chat or to a discussant, please feel free. And we do have questions, so if everybody keeps their comments somewhat quickly, that'll make it a little better for everyone. Javier, I think you were first to want to respond.
So you just quickly to add to one of the questions on the size, and I think that it's important also to look for cities that are open. So the importance of the open forum, that links also to a question on the global south, and I think that in the global south we see a lot of developments that cities are built as not open but as closed, like with a lot of gated communities, and streets can act as glue. It's on open cities where streets are visited, where we see the possibility of encounters. So I would say that the form, the open form, is more important than the size.
Thank you. And I guess we'll take another question first, and then Simone, you can come afterwards. Chris, feel free.
Not to distract from all of the excellent details in these presentations, but I just want to throw out sort of one word of it, which is AI, and see if anybody has any responses to how the framing of policy in a world in which some economies are, it seems like, driven by really an out of control race. They feel it's not a choice, and toward a world which will be radically different in a short time. That wasn't too cryptic.
No, thank you, Chris. Also, I'll just point, if somebody wants to respond to the AI, there was a question by Frederick Kirsten talking about the influence of AI also on participatory methods. So you could have AI as a societal issue, and how it changes labor interactions and societal interactions generally, but then also used as particular tools, in this case, participatory methods. The respondents can think about how they want to respond to that, the participants, and then Simone, maybe you can go ahead before responding to Chris.
Okay, as you like. So I mean, there was one point raised that maybe help to make a different argument. So I think that the reason why we start working on this disaggregated model, this macro simulation model, Eurogreen, was the idea that change in these well-being drivers that we call, so that take a quite open space, because there is also, access to public services that, of course, we are assuming that are increasing somehow, and so we test to econometrics that they're increasing life satisfaction. But what I think is more important is that they, more than reducing or increasing aggregate consumption, that would change how people would spend money in the consumption, different consumption goods. And so we made this matching within dataset to try to grasp this relationship. And the most interesting question is not really to have a theory to understand if different goods are changing and according to what theories that we can find, but mainly which are the impact of this change according to the macroeconomic model. And I think that this is important also if you think about the transition that we have to do, and in particular, thinking not only to policy for the transition itself, but also some of the transformation that we have and that you mentioned, like the artificial intelligence, that make how we can make the system more resilient and to make this kind of well-being less associated to money in general. But of course, we have to take into account which are these kind of feedbacks. And I think that this point is also important to, to sell this kind of idea, sort of beyond growth approach to policymaker, because we can understand how this can be reliable, let's say, and can be also, not really something that destabilize the economic system, and maybe to produce some useful, improvements. So this was a bit the idea of the exercise that someone was asking. I think his answer also to how the model could somehow help policy decision and convince maybe to take some choices in a certain direction. So, but thanks to all for the long number of questions. So we'll see afterward.
Thank you. Francesco, I think you wanted to respond to Chris.
Well, to respond would be very arrogant, because what we know about AI and its effects is still very fragmentary. So if anything, this could be some speculation. That is, for what concerns me, based only on my views, and I've not done any research in this regard. However, the way in which AI will affect our lives, in my opinion, is still unclear. And why? Because, for instance, one way could be a way through which it affects democracy. But we've seen even recently that democratic process could be threatened even in absence of AI. There has been recent news showing that Meta has been used in the recent years, 2022, or in 2024, to influence the political campaigns in Italy and other European countries, and most likely also United States. And this before the AI became widely available. So AI is not AI per se that would threaten our democracy. It's the kind of uses that we're going to make out of this. So perhaps AI is a tool that needs to be regulated. The other element that I see is through its impacts on employment, and therefore on our ability also to consume. AI promises to reduce production costs dramatically. It could create large unemployment, but then we need to think about what is the equilibrium in this economic system, because if nobody can afford to buy the goods and services that are provided very cheaply by AI, then nobody will have interest in producing this stuff. Then vice versa, we will either provide these goods and services for free, or we will have to provide individuals the possibility to buy this. So perhaps AI could accelerate the introduction of universal basic incomes and services. So again, it's something that the consequences of these changes have to be evaluated. Perhaps what we need is some sort of agreement on which kind of uses of AI are desirable and which are not. Because if AI is used to inform weapons, to eliminate targets outside of the control of individuals, then I would say this is a use of AI that should be forbidden by the United Nations if there are still, if this institution would survive the current economic historical period. So these are my three elements of reflection. I would be very happy to have a conversation on this with you and anyone else interested.
I'm interested, Francesco.
Yeah, me too. Just a comment, Chris. AI is an instrument, is a technology, and no technology is good or bad per se. It depends on how it is used, and this is up to us.
A lot to be said, so we should reconvene on this topic soon, and probably again and again. Francesco, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just a quick note, because I understand we are wrapping it up. I just want to say that this is the first of some meetings that we will have to discuss our policies. And so please stay tuned. Personally, it has been a very enriching experience. I learned that 1 hour and a half is perhaps too short for this kind of exercise. If you have any feedback now or in the future, please let us know, drop us an email. And again, thank you to everyone, and especially to our two discussants.
I wanted to thank you, Francesco, very helpful finishing. And I also wanted to pass it back to Martijn if he wanted to say anything else.
Yes, so on my behalf, many thanks. It was a very insightful discussion for both discussants. Thanks a lot. So when we started the project, like well-being was, I think, more at the center stage of policy discussions, maybe nowadays. At the same time, I feel if we even move to competitive security, resilience as main topics, they are very much related to well-being. But it's also a matter of framing, and that is also, I think, that I learned from this session. But thanks a lot for both your input.